to introduce you to a friend of mine, somebody that I've admired all my life, who has been a great inspiration to me. His name is Clement Hofbauer. Clement was born in 1751 and he died in 1820. He was one of the two Redemptorists who brought the Redemptorist congregation across the Alps into Europe, and he worked tirelessly for 34 years trying to found the Redemptorists. A little background. He grew up in what is now the Czech Republic. As a young man, he worked in a bakery. His family were poor. He learned Latin from the monks in the monastery where he was working in the kitchen. Then he went to Vienna. He was a hermit for a short while, went to Vienna, worked in a bakery there, wanted to go to university, eventually managed to get there, and he read the writings of this Bishop Alphonsus Liguori, who had started the Redemptorists. Clement and his friend Thaddeus Hubel travelled to Rome. They walked from Vienna across the Alps down to Rome and asked to join this new congregation, the Redemptorists. He did his novitiate, he was professed, he took his vows, and then he was ordained. And then very soon afterwards, Thaddeus and Clement were asked, please, will you go back across the Alps up into Northern Europe, see can you start the Redemptorists there? He went to Vienna, no luck there, he wasn't allowed. He went to Warsaw, a city that was, a country that was being torn apart at the time between Russia and Prussia. Poland was being divided up. There were many battles, many orphans. So Clement and Thaddeus stayed there. They got a little church, they began to preach there and to minister. Others joined them. He had an orphanage built for the boys, who were so many of them, and then a trade school. An orphanage for girls was started by the women that were companions and co-workers with him. And eventually, that was a very successful work. It was hard work. Clement had to beg and borrow for feeding and clothing these young people. He was a man who had a stout pair of boots, because he not only walked from Rome back to Vienna, but he walked from Warsaw down to Switzerland, trying to set up the Redemptorist community here, another one there. Each time he went there, he'd set up the community, a few Redemptorists. It would be closed within a few years because the Freemasons did not want them. So he walked, he had his boots, he had his rosary beads, he was a man of prayer, contemplative, a hermit who was always a pilgrim and always trying to do the work of the Lord. Eventually, Napoleon came after 21 years of the Redemptorists in Warsaw. Napoleon ordered the closure of their monastery. They were all scattered. Clement and a companion went back down to Vienna, where they had come from. In Vienna, the spies watched him, and he was not allowed to preach much of the time. He was chaplain to a convent of nuns. He had a small house very near, and his living room was his church for quite a few years. University students, artists, politicians, even during the Council of Vienna in 1816, they came to talk to this priest, Clement. He kept trying to found the Redemptorists, but every attempt was a failure. But he never gave up. He never gave up. His companion, Thaddeus Hubel, when they were still in Warsaw, Thaddeus was called out on a sick call one day, and then in the carriage where he was being brought, he was beaten to a pulp, he was thrown out on the road, and he died. Clement went into a deep depression, a very tough time for him for many months. But again, he never gave up. At the end of his days, he still hadn't founded the Redemptorists as he had hoped. When he died, the emperor had just heard about the good work this priest had been doing, but everybody had maligned Clement. And then the emperor, 4 weeks after the death of Clement on the 15th of March of 1820, the emperor gave permission for them to open a church in Vienna, an old church, and to begin to train young Redemptorists. So here was a man who knew failure all through his life. He walked, he had the pair of boots, he had his rosary beads, the scriptures in his heart, and yet at the very end, when he died, success came that he had prayed for and hoped for. One person, young man who carried his coffin, a university student, was a man called Frederick de Held, and 31 years later, Frederick de Held came to Ireland as a Redemptorist, preaching the very first Redemptorist mission in Ireland. So this is my friend, this is my inspiration. We call him the second founder of the Redemptorists, and it's 200 years this year since his death. I thank God for the man who never gave up, who never, ever